Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she polished the last corner of the grand piano. The big black instrument sat in the middle of the huge ballroom like a sleeping giant. Its surface was so shiny now that she could see her own face looking back at her. She had been working on it for 2 hours, making sure every inch was perfect. The Whitmore estate was getting ready for its biggest night of the year. Tonight was the annual charity gala, and all the rich people in the city would come. Maria had worked at this fancy house for 3 years now. She knew exactly how important this night was to the Whitmore family and their friends. The ballroom was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Maria sometimes got dizzy looking up at it. Beautiful paintings hung on the walls, and crystal lights hung down like frozen waterfalls. The marble floor was so clean and smooth that it looked like ice. Maria had spent hours making sure it sparkled. She picked up her cleaning supplies and moved quietly toward the kitchen. The house was buzzing with activity. Other workers rushed around, carrying flowers, setting up tables, and preparing food. The cook, Mrs. Henderson, was yelling orders at everyone. The gardener was bringing in more flowers. The security guards were checking all the doors and windows. Maria liked to stay out of the way during big events. She had learned that rich people did not like to see the help too much. They wanted everything to be perfect, but they did not want to think about who made it perfect. So Maria became very good at being invisible. She went to the kitchen and got fresh towels and glass cleaner. The guests would start arriving in 2 hours. She needed to make sure all the mirrors and windows were spotless. Rich people noticed everything, and they were not shy about complaining if something was wrong. As she walked back through the hallway, Maria could hear Mrs. Pemberton, the event coordinator, talking on her phone. Mrs. Pemberton was a thin woman with gray hair who always wore expensive suits. She was very good at organizing events, but she got very stressed when things were not perfect. Yes, I understand," Mrs. Pemberton was saying into her phone. "Victoria Sterling will be here at 7:30. The piano is ready. Everything is perfect." Victoria Sterling was the famous piano player who would perform tonight. Maria had heard her music on the radio many times. She was supposed to be one of the best piano players in the world. People had paid $500 each just to hear her play. Maria smiled a little as she thought about the piano. She had been extra careful cleaning it because she knew how important it was. Sometimes, when she was alone in the ballroom, she would sit at the piano bench and just look at the keys. She never touched them, of course. That would be wrong. But she liked to imagine what it would feel like to play such a beautiful instrument. She had played piano once, a long time ago, back when she was young and had dreams of becoming a musician. But that was before her father left and her mother got sick, before she had to quit school and find work to pay the bills, before she learned that dreams were expensive things that poor people could not afford. The doorbell rang, and Maria quickly hid behind a large flower arrangement. The first guests were arriving early. She watched through the flowers as Mr. Whitmore opened the door. He was a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit. He owned several businesses and was one of the richest people in the city. "Harold." "Margaret, so good to see you," Mr. Whitmore said, shaking hands with the couple at the door. The man wore a black tuxedo, and the woman wore a long blue dress that probably cost more than Maria made in a year. More guests began arriving. The women wore beautiful gowns in every color. Their jewelry sparkled under the lights. The men looked important in their black suits. They all spoke in loud, confident voices about things Maria did not understand. Stock markets, country clubs, vacation homes, expensive cars. Maria moved from room to room, making sure everything was ready. She filled water glasses, straightened flowers, and cleaned any spots she found. The guests paid no attention to her. To them, she was just part of the furniture. In the main dining room, she heard a group of women talking about their children. One woman was bragging about her daughter getting into an expensive private school. Another was complaining about how hard it was to find good help these days. They talked about their maids and gardeners like they were discussing pets. Maria tried not to listen, but it was hard to ignore. She had heard these conversations many times before. Rich people often talked about poor people like they were not real humans with feelings and dreams. They never seemed to think that their help might be listening. She moved to the ballroom where more guests were gathering. The men stood in small groups, talking about business deals and golf games. The women admired each other's dresses and jewelry. Everyone held wine glasses and laughed at jokes that were not very funny. Mrs. Pemberton walked around the room, checking on everything. She looked at her watch and smiled. Everything was going according to plan. The food was ready, the decorations were perfect, and the piano was waiting for Victoria Sterling. Maria continued her work, refilling glasses and clearing empty plates. She had become an expert at moving through crowds without being noticed. She knew exactly when to appear with a fresh napkin or a new glass of wine. She knew how to smile politely without making eye contact. She knew how to be helpful without being seen. As the evening went on, more and more guests arrived. The ballroom, filled with laughter and conversation. The charity auction began, and people bid hundreds of dollars on paintings and jewelry. Everyone seemed happy and excited. Maria watched from the corner of the room as Mrs. Pemberton walked to the microphone. It was almost time for the main event. Victoria Sterling would play the piano, and everyone would listen to beautiful music. Then they would all go home feeling good about themselves for helping charity, but Maria had no idea that this night would be different from all the others. She had no idea that in just a few hours everything would change. She had no idea that the piano she had polished so carefully would become the center of a moment that would transform her life forever. For now, she just continued her work, invisible and forgotten, while the rich people enjoyed their perfect evening. The phone rang in Mrs. Pemberton's office at exactly 7:15. She was putting on her lipstick and getting ready to announce Victoria Sterling's performance. The charity gala was going perfectly so far. The guests were happy, the food was delicious, and everyone was excited to hear the famous piano player. Mrs. Pemberton picked up the phone with a smile. "Hello, this is Margaret Pemberton." "Mrs. Pemberton, this is Victoria Sterling's manager, David Chun." The voice on the other end sounded worried and upset. "I'm afraid I have terrible news." Mrs. Pemberton's smile disappeared. Her heart started beating faster. "What's wrong? Is Victoria running late?" "No, Mrs. Pemberton. Victoria is in the hospital. She got very sick about an hour ago. Food poisoning. The doctors say she cannot leave the hospital tonight. She cannot perform." Mrs. Pemberton felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. She sat down hard in her chair. "Food poisoning? Are you sure? Maybe she could just play for a few minutes?" "I'm sorry, but no, she's too sick to even sit up. The doctors are giving her medicine through a tube in her arm. There's no way she can play piano tonight." Mrs. Pemberton looked at her watch. The performance was supposed to start in 15 minutes. 200 guests were sitting in the ballroom, waiting to hear Victoria Sterling play. They had each paid $500 for tickets. Many of them had come only because Victoria Sterling was performing. "What am I going to do?" Mrs. Pemberton said, more to herself than to David Chun. "I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Pemberton. Victoria is very upset about this. She knows how important tonight is for the charity, but there's nothing we can do." Mrs. Pemberton hung up the phone and put her head in her hands. This was a disaster. The charity was counting on this money. They needed to raise at least $50,000 tonight to help the children's hospital. Without Victoria Sterling's performance, many guests would leave early. Some might even demand their money back. She grabbed her phone and started making calls. Maybe she could find another piano player. It was worth a try. The first number she called was the city's music school. "Hello, this is Margaret Pemberton from the Whitmore Estate. I need a piano player for tonight. It's an emergency." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Pemberton, but all our teachers are busy tonight. Saturday evening is our biggest concert night." She tried the symphony orchestra. "Please, I'm desperate. I'll pay anything. Our pianist is performing with us tonight." "I'm sorry, but there's no one available." Call after call, the answer was the same. Every good piano player in the city was either performing somewhere else or not available. One musician said he could come, but he wanted $3,000 for such short notice. The charity could not afford that much money. Mrs. Pemberton Looked at her watch again, 7:25. The guests were getting restless. She could hear their voices getting louder in the ballroom. They were wondering when the music would start. She walked to the ballroom and looked at all the people. They were dressed in their finest clothes, holding wine glasses, talking and laughing, but she could see some of them checking their watches. They were expecting the performance to begin soon. Mrs. Pemberton took a deep breath and walked to the microphone. The room slowly got quiet as people noticed her standing there. She had to tell them the truth. There was no other choice. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice shaking a little. "I hope you're all enjoying the evening so far." People clapped politely and smiled. They were ready for the music to begin. "I'm afraid I have some disappointing news," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "Victoria Sterling has become ill and cannot perform tonight. She's in the hospital with food poisoning." The room exploded with surprised voices. People started talking all at once. Some looked angry, others looked worried about Victoria Sterling. Mrs. Pemberton held up her hand, trying to get everyone to be quiet. "I've been trying to find a replacement, but every professional musician in the city is already performing tonight. I'm truly sorry for this disappointment." Eleanor Blackwood, one of the richest women in the city, stood up from her table. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than most people's cars. Her diamond necklace sparkled under the lights. "This is unacceptable," Eleanor said loudly. "We paid good money to hear Victoria Sterling play. What are you going to do about it?" Other guests started agreeing with her. "We came here specifically for the music," said a man in an expensive suit. "Without the performance, this is just another boring dinner party." Mrs. Pemberton felt panic rising in her chest. She could see some guests already standing up, getting ready to leave. If too many people left, the charity would not raise enough money. The children's hospital would suffer. "Please, everyone," Mrs. Pemberton said. "The charity auction is still happening. We have beautiful items to bid on, and the food is excellent. Please don't let this ruin the evening." But more guests were getting up from their tables. Some were heading toward the door. Others were talking loudly about wanting their money back. The perfect evening was turning into a disaster. Eleanor Blackwood was still standing, looking very angry. "I have a charity auction at my house next week. I could have stayed home tonight. We came here for the music, and now there's no music." A man near the back of the room shouted, "Maybe we should just go home. This is a waste of time without the piano performance." Mrs. Pemberton watched helplessly as more people started leaving. The room that had been full of happy, excited guests was now full of disappointed, angry people. She had worked for months to make this evening perfect, and now it was falling apart. She looked at the beautiful grand piano sitting in the middle of the room. It was perfectly polished and ready for a performance that would never happen. The piano bench sat empty, waiting for a musician who would never come. Maria Santos was standing near the kitchen door, holding a tray of empty glasses. She had been watching the whole scene unfold. She could see the panic in Mrs. Pemberton's eyes. She could see the angry guests getting ready to leave. She could see the disappointment spreading through the room like a dark cloud. Maria felt sorry for Mrs. Pemberton. She had worked so hard to make this evening special. And Maria felt sorry for the children's hospital. They needed the money that this evening was supposed to raise, but what could Maria do? She was just the help. She cleaned houses and served food. She was not important enough to help with a crisis like this. She was just supposed to stay invisible and do her job. The room was getting louder as more guests complained and more people got ready to leave. The perfect evening was becoming a complete disaster, and there seemed to be nothing anyone could do to stop it. Eleanor Blackwood was not the type of woman who accepted disappointment quietly. She had gotten used to getting what she wanted when she wanted it. Tonight she wanted to hear beautiful piano music, and she was not getting it. She stood up from her table and walked closer to the microphone where Mrs. Pemberton was still trying to calm down the angry guests. Eleanor's red dress rustled as she moved, and her diamond jewelry caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. "This is ridiculous," Eleanor said loudly, making sure everyone could hear her. We pay $500 per ticket, and now we're told there's no entertainment? What kind of event planning is this? Other guests started agreeing with her. A man in a black tuxedo said, "I canceled my golf game to come here tonight. This is very disappointing." A woman at another table added, "My husband and I drove 2 hours to get here. We could have stayed home and listened to music on our expensive sound system instead." Mrs. Pemberton tried to speak again, but Eleanor held up her hand to stop her. Eleanor was enjoying being the center of attention. She liked it when people listened to her and agreed with her. "You know what?" Eleanor said, looking around the room with a mean smile. "Maybe we don't need a professional musician. Maybe we can find our own entertainment right here." She turned and looked directly at Maria, who was still standing by the kitchen door holding her tray of empty glasses. Maria felt her heart jump when she realized Eleanor was staring at her. "Well, perhaps the help can entertain us instead," Eleanor said loudly, pointing her finger at Maria. Several guests turned to look at Maria. Some of them started laughing. Maria felt her face get hot with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, but she could not move. Her feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. "Yes, that's a wonderful idea," said a man with a thick mustache. "The little maid there probably knows how to play something simple." More people started laughing. The laughter was not kind or friendly. It was the type of laughter that made fun of someone. Maria had heard this type of laughter before, but never when it was directed at her. "I'm sure she knows chopsticks," shouted a woman in a blue dress. "All the servants know simple songs like that." The laughter got louder. More guests turned to stare at Maria. She felt like she was standing under a bright spotlight with nowhere to hide. The tray in her hands started shaking because her hands were trembling. Eleanor was clearly enjoying herself now. She had found a way to entertain the guests and make herself the center of attention. She walked a few steps closer to Maria. "Come on, dear," Eleanor said in a fake sweet voice. "Don't be shy. I'm sure you can play something for us. Even if it's just a simple children's song." A man at a nearby table stood up and started clapping slowly. "Yes, let's hear from the help. This should be amusing." More people started clapping, but not in a good way. They were clapping to make fun of Maria. She felt like she was in a bad dream. All these rich, important people were looking at her and laughing at her. "I bet she's never even touched a piano before," said a woman with gray hair. "But maybe she can dust it while we watch." This comment made everyone laugh even harder. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had never felt so small and embarrassed in her entire life. A young man in an expensive suit called out, "Maybe she can play with just one finger. I'm sure that's about her skill level." The laughter was getting crueler. Maria looked around the room, hoping to find a friendly face, but everyone was either laughing at her or looking at her like she was some kind of entertainment. "This is better than any professional performance," Eleanor said. "At least this is free entertainment." Maria tried to take a step backward toward the kitchen, but Eleanor noticed and called out, "Don't be shy now, dear. We're all waiting to hear what you can do." Mrs. Pemberton was watching all of this happen, but she did not know what to do. She felt bad for Maria, but she was also desperate to keep the guests happy. Maybe if they had some entertainment, even if it was just making fun of the help, they would not all leave. "Come on, everyone," Eleanor said, still pointing at Maria. "Let's encourage her. Maybe if we all ask Nuzly, she'd play something for us." Several guests started calling out things like, "Yes, play something," and "Don't be shy." But their voices were not kind. They were still making fun of Maria. Maria felt like she could not breathe. The room seemed to be spinning around her. All these people were staring at her, laughing at her, treating her like she was not a real person with feelings. She had worked at the Whitmore estate for 3 years. She had always been polite and done her job well. She had never bothered anyone or caused any problems. She had stayed invisible, just like she was supposed to. And now, suddenly, she was the center of attention in the worst possible way. "I think she's too scared," said a man near the back of the room. She probably doesn't even know which end of the piano makes the music. More cruel laughter filled the room. Maria felt a tear roll down her cheek. She tried to wipe it away quickly, but several people noticed. "Oh, look, she's crying," said a woman in a purple dress. "How sweet. The little maid is embarrassed." Eleanor was enjoying this more than she had enjoyed anything all evening. She had turned the disappointing situation into her own personal entertainment. She was the star of the show now, and everyone was following her lead. "Don't cry, dear," Eleanor said in her fake sweet voice. "We're not trying to be mean. We just want to hear you play. Even if you can only play Mary Had a Little Lamb, we'll be impressed." The laughter got even louder. Maria felt like she was drowning in it. She wanted to run away, but she was afraid that would just make things worse. She was trapped in front of all these people who thought she was nothing more than a joke. Mrs. Pemberton finally decided she had to do something. She walked over to Maria and put her hand on her shoulder. Maria looked up at her with tears in her eyes. "Maria," Mrs. Pemberton said quietly, "you don't have to do anything. Just ignore them." But Eleanor heard this and called out, "No, no, Mrs. Pemberton, we want to hear from Maria. It's the least she can do since we don't have any real entertainment tonight." The room full of rich, important people all turned to look at Maria again. She was just a poor girl who cleaned houses for a living. She was nobody special. She was just the help, or so they thought. Mrs. Pemberton stood next to Maria, watching the cruel laughter fill the room. She felt terrible about what was happening. These people were supposed to be civilized, educated, and kind. But they were acting like bullies in a school playground. As she looked at Maria's tear-filled eyes, Mrs. Pemberton suddenly remembered something. It was a memory from about 6 months ago. She had been walking past the ballroom late one evening when she heard music. Beautiful, complex music coming from the piano. She had stopped to listen, wondering who was playing. The music was not simple or amateur. It was professional level, with difficult runs and complicated harmonies. She had quietly looked into the ballroom and seen Maria sitting at the piano, playing with her eyes closed, lost in the music. Mrs. Pemberton had not said anything at the time. She had just listened for a few minutes and then walked away. But the memory had stayed with her. She had heard Maria humming classical pieces while she worked. She had seen Maria's fingers sometimes moving like she was playing invisible piano keys. Now, as the laughter continued around them, Mrs. Pemberton made a decision. She gently took Maria's arm and led her a few steps away from the crowd. "Maria," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something important." Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yes, Mrs. Pemberton? I remember hearing you play piano once. Late at night, about 6 months ago. You were playing in the ballroom." Maria's eyes got wide with fear. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Pemberton. I know I shouldn't have touched the piano. I was just remembering." "No, no," Mrs. Pemberton said quickly. "You're not in trouble? The music was beautiful. Really beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that?" Maria looked down at her feet. "I studied piano for many years when I was younger, before my life changed. Can you still play? I mean, could you play tonight?" Maria looked up at Mrs. Pemberton with surprise. "You mean ... in front of all these people?" Mrs. Pemberton nodded. "I know it's a lot to ask, but Maria, we need help. The charity needs this money. These people are going to leave, and the children's hospital won't get the money they need." Maria looked over at the crowd of rich people who were still laughing and making jokes about her. "But they're making fun of me. They think I'm just a stupid maid who doesn't know anything." "That's exactly why this could work," Mrs. Pemberton said. "They don't expect anything from you. If you can really play piano well, you could surprise them. You could save this whole evening." Maria felt her heart pounding. She had not performed in front of people for 10 years. Not since she had to quit the music conservatory when her father left and her mother got sick. She had given up her dreams of becoming a professional musician to take care of her family. "I don't know if I can," Maria said. "It's been so long, and I'm scared." Mrs. Pemberton could see the fear in Maria's eyes, but she could also see something else. a small spark of hope, a tiny flame of the dreams that Maria had buried deep inside her heart. "What were you studying at the conservatory?" Mrs. Pemberton asked. "Piano performance," Maria said quietly. "I was in my third year when I had to quit. I was going to audition for the City Symphony Orchestra." Mrs. Pemberton felt a chill run down her spine. Maria had been studying to be a professional piano player. She had been good enough to think about auditioning for the symphony orchestra. This was not just someone who could play a few simple songs. "Maria," Mrs. Pemberton said, "I think you might be exactly what we need tonight." Behind them, the laughter was starting to die down a little, but Eleanor Blackwood was still making jokes. "Maybe we should get her a little stool to stand on so she can reach the keys," Eleanor said. More mean laughter filled the room. Maria heard it and felt her face get hot again. "They'll just laugh at me more," Maria said. "What if I make mistakes? What if I'm not good anymore?" Mrs. Pemberton put her hand on Maria's shoulder. "Maria, 6 months ago, you were playing music. That made me stop and listen. It was beautiful. It was professional. I think you're better than you know." Maria looked at the grand piano sitting in the middle of the room. It was the same piano she had polished so carefully that afternoon. The same piano she had played in secret that night 6 months ago. The same piano she had dreamed about playing. "When she was a student, what would I play?" Maria asked. "Whatever you want," Mrs. Pemberton said. "Something that shows them who you really are." Maria thought about all the music she had learned over the years. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, Bach, pieces that had made her feel alive when she was young. Pieces that had made her believe she could be something special. "I used to play Chopin," Maria said. "His ballades were my favorite." Mrs. Pemberton smiled. "Then play Chopin." Maria looked around the room at all the rich people who had been making fun of her. They were still talking and laughing, not paying attention to her conversation with Mrs. Pemberton. They had no idea what was about to happen. What? "If they don't like it?" Maria asked. "What if they do?" Mrs. Pemberton replied. Maria took a deep breath. She thought about her mother, who was at home watching television and taking her medicine. Her mother who had always believed in Maria's musical talent. Her mother who had cried when Maria had to quit the conservatory. She thought about all the dreams she had given up. All the music she had kept locked inside her heart for 10 years. All the time she had walked past pianos and wished she could play them. "Okay," Maria said quietly. "I'll try," Mrs. Pemberton smiled. "Are you sure?" Maria looked at the piano again. Her fingers were already starting to remember the feeling of the keys. Her heart was starting to remember the joy of making music. "Yes," Maria said, her voice getting stronger. "I'm sure." Mrs. Pemberton squeezed Maria's hand. "Then let's show them what you can do." They walked back toward the crowd of guests. Eleanor was still making jokes, and people were still laughing, but Mrs. Pemberton walked to the microphone with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I have an announcement to make." The room got quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. "We do have a pianist who can perform for us tonight," Mrs. Pemberton said. The crowd looked around, wondering who she was talking about. Then they saw Maria walking toward the piano, and the laughter started again, but this time Maria did not stop. She walked straight to the piano bench and sat down. Her hands were shaking, but she was not going to run away. She was going to play. Maria walked across the marble floor toward the grand piano. Each step felt like it took forever. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought everyone in the room could hear it. The laughter around her got louder with every step she took. "This is going to be hilarious," said a man in a blue suit. "I can't wait to hear what she thinks piano music sounds like." "Someone should record this," said a woman with blonde hair. "This will be the funniest thing we've seen all year." Eleanor Blackwood was standing near her table, watching Maria with a big smile on her face. She was enjoying this moment more than she had enjoyed anything in months. She had found the perfect way to entertain everyone and make herself the center of attention. "Look at her," Eleanor said loudly. "She's actually going to try to play. This is better than any comedy show." Maria reached the piano and stood beside the bench. The piano was so beautiful and shiny. She remembered polishing it just a few hours ago. She had been so careful to make it perfect. Now she was going to sit at it and play it in front of all these people. The piano bench was the right height for her. She adjusted it just a little bit and sat down. The keys were right in front of her, black and white, waiting for her touch. She had not sat at a piano bench in front of people for 10 years. "Oh, she's actually going to do it," said a man near the back of the room. "This poor girl has no idea how embarrassing this is going to be." Maria placed her hands on her knees and took a deep breath. She tried to remember what her piano teacher had taught her years ago. "Feel the music first," her teacher had said. "Don't just play the notes. Feel the story the music is telling." She looked out at the crowd of people. They were all staring at her, waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Their faces were full of amusement and expectation. They wanted to see her fail. Eleanor walked a few steps closer to the piano. "Don't be nervous, dear," she said in her fake sweet voice. "We're not expecting much. Just play whatever simple song you know." More laughter filled the room. Maria felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. But she also felt something else growing inside her. It was not fear or sadness. It was anger. These people were treating her like she was nothing, like she was just a joke for their entertainment. "Maybe she needs the sheet music for Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," said a woman in a green dress. "Or Happy Birthday," added another guest. That's probably more her level. The laughter was cruel and mean. Maria had never heard so many people being so unkind to one person. She realized that these rich, educated people were not really any better than bullies on a school playground. Maria lifted her hands and placed them gently on the piano keys. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingers. She had forgotten how good it felt to touch piano keys. It was like coming home after a long trip. "Here we go," said Eleanor. "Everyone get ready for the performance of a lifetime." The room was full of anticipation. Everyone was waiting for Maria to play something simple and embarrassing. They were waiting to laugh at her even more. Maria closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her mother, who had worked extra jobs to pay for her piano lessons when she was young. She thought about her old piano teacher who had believed in her talent. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing, dreaming of becoming a professional musician. She thought about the music she loved, Chopin's Ballade. No, one in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire. It required perfect technique, deep emotion, and years of practice to play correctly. It was not a piece for beginners or amateurs. "Any day now," called out a man from the back of the room. "We're all waiting." Maria opened her eyes and looked. At the keys, her fingers found their positions automatically. After 10 years, they still remembered where to go. Her body still remembered how to sit at the piano. Her heart still remembered how to feel the music. She took one more deep breath and began to play. The first note of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 came out clear and strong. It was not a simple note or a beginner's mistake. It was perfect. The second note followed, then the third. The melody began to unfold, complex and beautiful. The laughter in the room started to fade. A few people stopped talking and turned to listen more carefully. But most of the guests were still expecting Maria to make mistakes any moment. "She's actually playing something," said a woman with surprise in her voice. "Just wait," said Eleanor. "She mess up soon enough," but Maria did not mess up. The music continued to flow from her fingers like water from a spring. The melody was delicate and haunting, with complicated harmonies that only an experienced piano player could manage. More, people in the room started to notice that something unexpected was happening. The music was not simple or amateur. It was professional level. It was beautiful. "This doesn't sound like chopsticks," said a man in a confused voice. Maria continued playing, her fingers dancing across the keys with precision and grace. The music built in intensity, with rapid runs and difficult passages that required perfect technique. Her hands moved independently, playing different melodies at the same time. The room was getting quieter. People were starting to realize that they had made a big mistake. "The stupid maid," they had been making fun of was playing music that was more complex and beautiful than anything they had ever heard. Eleanor's smile was starting to fade. She was still standing near the piano, but she was not laughing anymore. She was listening and she was confused. This was not what was supposed to happen. The music continued to grow in complexity and beauty. Maria's fingers moved across the keys like they were dancing. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was filled with emotion. The piece was building toward something magnificent. "How is she doing this?" whispered a woman in a blue dress. Other guests were starting to look uncomfortable. They had been laughing at Maria just moments before, but now they were realizing that she was incredibly talented. More talented than they had ever imagined. The ballroom was getting quieter and quieter as more people stopped talking and started listening. The music was so beautiful that it demanded attention. It was impossible to ignore or talk over. Maria played with her eyes closed, lost in the music. She had forgotten about the cruel laughter. She had forgotten about the embarrassment. She was in her own world now, a world where only the music mattered. The melody reached a soft, delicate section that required perfect control and sensitivity. Maria played it flawlessly, her touch light and graceful. The notes floated through the air like butterflies. People in the room were starting to look at each other with confusion and surprise. This was not the entertainment they had expected. This was real music. Professional music, beautiful music. "She's actually really good," said a man in a shocked whisper. Eleanor was still standing near the piano, but her confident smile was completely gone now. She was staring at Maria's hands on the keys, not believing what she was seeing and hearing. The piece continued to build. With Maria's hands moving faster and more dramatically across the keys, the music became more intense and emotional. It told a story of dreams and heartbreak, of beauty and loss. By now, almost everyone in the room had stopped talking. They were all listening to Maria play. The cruel laughter had completely disappeared. Instead, there was amazement and growing respect. Maria opened her eyes for a moment and saw the faces of the people watching her. They were not laughing anymore. They were not making jokes. They were listening with serious expressions, some with their mouths slightly open in surprise. She closed her eyes again and continued playing. This was what she had been born to do. This was who she really was. Underneath the maid's uniform and the invisible life she had been living, the music reached its climactic section, with both hands playing rapid, complex passages that required years of training to master. Maria played every note perfectly, her technique flawless and her expression deep and moving. The room was now completely silent except for the magnificent music pouring from the piano. 200 rich, important people sat in total silence, listening to a woman they had dismissed as nothing more than hired help. Eleanor Blackwood stood frozen near the piano, finally understanding that she had made a terrible mistake. The little maid she had been mocking was more talented than anyone else in the room. More talented than most professional musicians. The music was telling Maria's story without words. It spoke of talent that had been hidden, dreams that had been buried, and beauty that had been ignored. It spoke of a young woman who had given up everything to take care of her family, but who had never really given up her gift. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Maria played with even more passion and intensity. This was her moment. After 10 years of silence, her music was finally being heard again. Maria reached the most difficult section of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. Her left hand played a deep, rolling bass line while her right hand danced through a melody that seemed to float above it. The two parts wove together like voices in conversation. Sometimes agreeing, sometimes arguing, always beautiful. The technique required for this section was extraordinary. Maria's fingers had to move independently, each one playing exactly the right note at exactly the right time. Her hands had to coordinate perfectly while playing completely different rhythms. Only someone with years of serious training could manage such complexity, but Maria played it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace. Every note was clear and precise. Every phrase was shaped with perfect musical understanding. The silence in the room was now complete. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Everyone was listening to the music with growing amazement. They could not believe what they were hearing. A woman near the front of the room had tears in her eyes. The music was so beautiful that it moved her emotionally. She had never heard anyone play with such feeling and skill. "My God," whispered a man in a black suit. "She's incredible." Eleanor Blackwood was still standing near the piano, but she looked like she wanted to disappear. Just minutes ago, she had been making fun of Maria and encouraging others to laugh at her. Now she was realizing that Maria was more talented than anyone she had ever heard. Play piano. Maria transitioned into a new section of the piece, where the melody became soft and gentle. This part required perfect control and sensitivity. The notes had to be played quietly but still with expression. It was like telling a secret that only the music could reveal. Maria's touch was featherlight on the keys. Each note sang out clearly but gently. The music seemed to float through the air like morning mist. Everyone in the room held their breath, afraid that any sound they made would disturb the beautiful moment. Mrs. Pemberton stood near the back of the room, tears streaming down her face. She had known that Maria could play, but she had not known that Maria could play like this. This was not just good playing. This was artistic genius. The piece continued to unfold, with Maria guiding the music through emotional highs and lows. Sometimes the music was gentle and sad, like a person remembering lost love. Sometimes it was passionate and intense, like someone fighting for their dreams. A man who owned several art galleries was listening with his eyes closed. He understood great art when he heard it, and this was great art. The woman playing piano was not just a skilled musician. She was an artist of the highest level. How did we not know? He whispered to his wife. How did we not see this? His wife was crying too. We only saw her uniform, she whispered back. We never looked deeper. Maria played a section where the music became wild and dramatic. Her hands flew across the keys, playing rapid scales and powerful chords. The music filled the entire ballroom with sound and emotion. It was like a storm of beauty that swept over everyone in the room. But even in the most dramatic moments, every note was perfect. Maria's technique was flawless. Her musical understanding was profound. She played not just the notes that Chopin had written, but the emotions and stories behind those notes. Eleanor felt ashamed of herself for the first time in years. She had spent her whole life thinking that money and social position made her better than other people. But this young woman, whom she had dismissed as just the help, had a gift that Eleanor could never buy or achieve. The music reached a climax that made several people in the room gasp with amazement. Maria's hands moved across the entire keyboard, playing chords that rang out like church bells. The sound was so powerful and beautiful that it seemed to shake the walls of the ballroom. Then, just as suddenly, the music became quiet again. Maria played a gentle, flowing melody that seemed to heal all the drama that had come before. Her fingers caressed the keys like she was stroking the face of someone she loved. A teenage girl who had come with her parents was watching Maria's hands with wonder. She had been taking piano lessons for 5 years, but she had never seen anyone play like this. She realized she was watching a master at work. "I want to play like that," she whispered to her mother. Her mother nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "So do I, honey." "So do I." The piece moved toward its conclusion, with Maria playing phrases that seemed to summarize everything that had come before. The music spoke of struggle and triumph, of dreams lost and found, of beauty that could not be hidden forever. Maria's eyes were still closed, but tears were running down her cheeks. She was not crying from sadness or embarrassment anymore. She was crying from the pure joy of making music again. She was crying because she had found herself again. The last section of the piece required Maria to play very softly while still maintaining the emotional intensity. It was like watching the sunset after a perfect day. Beautiful, gentle, but filled with meaning. Everyone in the room was completely still. They knew they were witnessing something special, something they would remember for the rest of their lives. They were seeing a true artist reveal her soul through music. As Maria played the final phrases, the music became even more gentle and delicate. The notes seemed to float away like whispers. The ballroom felt sacred, like a church where something holy was happening. Maria played the last few notes with infinite tenderness. Each one was perfect, clear, and full of emotion. The music told a complete story from beginning to end, a story of human dreams and struggles and ultimate triumph. When the final note faded into silence, Maria kept her hands on the keys for a moment. She could not believe what had just happened. She had played her music again. She had shared her gift with the world again. The silence that followed was deeper than any sound. 200 people sat in complete stillness, processing what they had just experienced. They had just heard one of the most beautiful piano performances of their lives, played by someone they had been laughing at just minutes before. The silence after Maria's performance stretched on and on. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. The last note of Chopin's ballade had faded away, but its beauty still filled the air like perfume. Maria sat at the piano bench with her hands still resting on the keys. She was afraid to look up at the audience. She had poured her entire soul into that performance, revealing parts of herself that she had kept hidden for 10 years. Now she felt naked and vulnerable in front of all these people. Slowly, she opened her eyes and lifted her head. The first person she saw was Eleanor Blackwood, who was standing just a few feet away from the piano. Eleanor's face was completely different now. Gone was the cruel smile and the mocking expression. Instead, Eleanor's eyes were filled with tears, and her hand was pressed to her mouth in shock. Maria looked out at the rest of the audience. Every face showed the same expression of amazement and disbelief. These were the same people who had been laughing at her and making cruel jokes just minutes before. Now they looked like they had seen a miracle. A woman in a silver dress was crying openly, not caring that her makeup was running down her cheeks. A man in an expensive suit was shaking his head slowly, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. An elderly couple was holding hands tightly, both of them with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Pemberton was standing near the back of the room, crying and smiling at the same time. She had known that Maria could play piano, but she had never imagined anything like this. This was not just good piano playing. This was artistic genius at the highest level. The teenage girl who had been watching Maria's hands was staring with her mouth open. She had been studying piano for years, but she had never heard anyone play with such skill and emotion. She realized she had just witnessed something that would change her life forever. That was ... said a man's voice, breaking the silence. But he could not finish his sentence. There were no words for what they had just experienced. Eleanor Blackwood took a step closer to the piano. Her hands were shaking and more tears were flowing down her face. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. I'm so sorry, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. I had no idea who you really are. Maria looked at Eleanor with surprise. This was the same woman who had been leading the cruel laughter just a few minutes ago. Now she looked completely broken and ashamed. Where did you learn to play like that? Asked a man in a blue suit. His voice was full of respect and wonder. Maria's voice was soft when she answered. I studied at the Metropolitan Music Conservatory for 3 years. I was training to be a professional concert pianist. A gasp went through the room. The Metropolitan Music Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Only the most talented students were accepted there. What happened? Asked the woman gently. Why did you stop? Maria looked down at her hands, which were still resting on the piano keys. My father left when I was 20. My mother got very sick and could not work. I had to quit school and find a job to pay for her medicine and our rent. The room was completely silent as people absorbed this information. They were beginning to understand the full story. Maria had given up her dreams and her career to take care of her family. She had sacrificed everything. You've been cleaning houses for 10 years? Asked Mrs. Pemberton. Maria nodded. I work 3 different jobs. Clean houses during the day, I work at a restaurant at night, and I clean offices on weekends. My mother needs expensive medicine. Eleanor put her hand to her heart. She spent more money on shoes in 1 month than Maria made in an entire year. She had been making fun of someone who worked 3 jobs to take care of her sick mother. My God, Eleanor whispered, what have we done? A man who owned a chain of hotels stood up from his table. Young lady, that was the most beautiful piano performance I have ever heard. And I've been to Carnegie Hall dozens of times. Other people began to speak up, their voices full of amazement and respect. That was absolutely incredible. I've never heard anything so moving. You're more talented than most professional musicians. Maria looked around the room in confusion. These were the same people who had been treating her like dirt just a few minutes ago. Now they were praising her and treating her with respect. It was hard to believe the change was real, but she could see in their faces that it was real. They were not pretending or being polite. They were genuinely amazed by what they had heard. They finally understood who she really was. Eleanor walked closer to the piano and knelt down next to the bench. She looked up at Maria with tears streaming down her face. Maria, I am so deeply sorry for how I treated you. I was cruel and thoughtless. I judged you without knowing anything about you. Can you ever forgive me? Maria looked down at this rich, powerful woman who was kneeling beside her and apologizing. Eleanor Blackwood, who owned mansions and expensive cars, who was one of the most important people in the city, was asking for forgiveness from a housekeeper. It's okay, Maria said softly. You didn't know. But I should have known, Eleanor said. I should have treated you with respect from the beginning, no matter what job you had. There is no excuse for how I acted. A woman in a green dress stood up from her table. Maria, can I ask you something? Do you still dream of being a professional musician? Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. Every day, she whispered, but it's too late now. I'm 28 years old. I've been away from music for too long. It's never too late, said the man who owned the art galleries. Talent like yours doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to show itself again. Mrs. Pemberton walked up to the piano with a huge smile on her face. Maria, I think tonight might be that right moment. Maria looked around the room at all the faces staring at her with respect and admiration. These people had power and money and influence. If they wanted to help her, they could change her life. But could she dare to hope? Could she dare to dream again after 10 years of just surviving? The answer came from her heart, where the music lived. Yes, she could dare to hope. Yes, she could dare to dream. Tonight she had remembered who she really was. She was not just a housekeeper, she was a musician. She was an artist. And for the first time in 10 years, that felt like enough. Maria sat at the piano bench, looking out at the room full of people who had completely changed their opinion of her. The silence stretched on, filled with emotion and amazement. Then slowly, one person began to clap. It was the teenage girl, who had been watching Maria's hands so carefully. She stood up from her table and began applauding, her face shining with joy and inspiration. The sound of her clapping echoed through the quiet ballroom. Then her father stood up and joined her. Then her mother. Then the elderly couple who had been holding hands. One by one, person after person rose to their feet, clapping with growing enthusiasm. Within moments, the entire room was standing. 200 of the city's wealthiest and most important people were giving Maria a standing ovation. The applause grew louder and louder, filling the ballroom with thunderous sound. Maria could not believe what she was seeing. She had never received a standing ovation in her life, not even when she was a student at the conservatory. Tears streamed down her face as she watched all these people showing her such respect and appreciation. The applause went on and on. People were not just clapping politely. They were clapping with real emotion, real appreciation for what they had just experienced. Some people were whistling. Others were shouting, "Bravo!" like they were at a professional concert. Eleanor Blackwood was clapping harder than anyone else, tears still running down her face. She felt so ashamed of how she had treated Maria, but she also felt grateful that she had been there to witness such an incredible performance. Mrs. Pemberton was clapping and crying at the same time. She felt proud that she had encouraged Maria to play. She felt amazed that this had all worked out so perfectly. The evening that had seemed like a disaster had turned into something magical. The applause continued for several minutes. Maria stood up from the piano bench and faced the audience, overwhelmed by their response. She had never felt so appreciated and respected in her entire life. When the applause finally began to quiet down, Eleanor walked up to Maria and took her hands. "Maria," Eleanor said, her voice still shaky with emotion, "I need to ask you about your mother's medical bills. How much do you need for her treatment?" Maria was surprised by the question. I don't know exactly. The medicine costs about $800 a month, and there are doctor visits and tests. Double quotes. Eleanor nodded. "I want to pay for all of it. Everything. Your mother should never have to worry about medical bills again." Maria stared at Eleanor in shock. "I can't accept that. It's too much." "Please," Eleanor said, "let me do this. It's the least I can do after how terribly I treated you tonight." Before Maria could respond, the man who owned the hotel chain stepped forward. "Maria, I want to offer you something too. I'm on the board of directors at the Metropolitan Music Conservatory. I can arrange for you to return to school and finish your degree. Full scholarship, of course." Maria felt dizzy. This was all happening so fast. "But I'm 28 years old now. Isn't that too old?" "Absolutely not," said a woman who turned out to be a professional music teacher. "Some of the best musicians don't find their true voice until they're older. You have wisdom and life experience now that you didn't have when you were younger." More people began coming forward with offers and ideas. The man who owned the art galleries wanted to organize a concert for Maria to perform at. A woman who ran a music academy wanted to hire Maria as a teacher. Someone else wanted to introduce Maria to agents who could help her start a professional performing career. Mrs. Pemberton stepped forward with a big smile. "And Maria, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore want to offer you a new position here at the estate. Instead of being a housekeeper, you would be our official music director. You would give piano lessons to their grandchildren and perform at all their events. The salary is 5 times what you're making now." Maria felt overwhelmed by all the generous offers. Just 2 hours ago, she had been invisible, ignored, and mocked. Now, all these important people wanted to help her and hire her and support her dreams. "I don't know what to say," Maria whispered. "Say yes," said the teenage girl who had started the standing ovation. "Say yes to all of it." Eleanor squeezed Maria's hands. "We all want to help you, Maria. We want to make up for the years you lost. We want to help you become the musician you were meant to be." Mrs. Pemberton announced to the whole room, "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should take up a special collection tonight. Not just for the Children's Hospital, but to start a scholarship fund in Maria's name. A fund to help other talented young people who have to give up their dreams because of money problems." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. People began pulling out their checkbooks and making pledges. Within minutes, they had raised over $100,000. Not only would Maria be able to return to school and pursue her dreams, but other young musicians would be helped too. Maria stood in the middle of all this generosity and kindness, hardly able to believe it was real. This morning she had woken up as a housekeeper with 3 jobs and no hope for the future. Tonight she was surrounded by people who believed in her talent and wanted to help her succeed. But the most important thing was not the money or the job offers or even the scholarship. The most important thing was that she had found her music again. She had remembered who she really was underneath all the years of struggle and sacrifice. 6 months later, Maria was back at the Metropolitan Music Conservatory, working toward her degree in piano performance. Her mother was healthy and happy, no longer worried about medical bills. Maria was teaching piano lessons to children and performing at concerts around the city. Eleanor Blackwood had become one of Maria's closest friends and biggest supporters. She had learned an important lesson about not judging people by their appearance or their job. She made sure to treat all the workers in her businesses with respect and kindness. The charity gala had raised more money than ever before, not just because of Maria's performance, but because people were inspired by her story. The scholarship fund continued to grow, helping dozens of young musicians pursue their dreams, and every time Maria sat down at a piano to perform, she remembered that night when everything changed. The night when cruel laughter turned into thunderous applause. The night when she learned that it's never too late to be who you really are. The night when she discovered that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the deepest struggles, and that dreams deferred are not always dreams denied.